Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode in Adventures of Comprehension. Super excited that you are joining in tonight because I have some really awesome strategies that I cannot wait to share with you. And I know you're going to want these. I know you're going to want to use them probably tomorrow. And I know they're going to be super helpful for your classroom. So, welcome. My name is Sierra Harris, and I am the author at Adventures of Room 129, soon to be the brand new Sierra Harris teaching. Yes, I am rebranding. The funny story behind Adventures of Room 129, that was actually the room number of the classroom that I was in when I first started my blog. Oh gosh, way back when. I'm talking 8, 9 years ago. And I just stayed with it. Even though I moved rooms, I think the year after I started my blog, I moved out of room 129, and it just stuck. I was always known as Adventures of Room 129, and it just kind of became this epitome of what a typical elementary classroom would hope to be. But nowadays I'm doing some different things and it's kind of time to move on. So I'm really sad and disheartened by the fact that I will no longer have this name, as it has been my identity on here for the last 8, 9 years. But I'm really excited to move on, kind of shed that, and grow some new wings and now be known by me, my name, Sierra Harris Teaching. And I can't wait to see where it takes me. So if you see some weird things happening, some name changes here or there, maybe you've noticed it in some places already, but that's coming very soon. And as soon as I have my new website up and running, I can't wait to show it to you all. So, anyways, random story. Welcome tonight. I can't wait to get started. Tonight we're going to be talking all about 4 different reading comprehension differentiation strategies. Say that 5 times fast. That you can do with your students. These are great to do whole group, but you can also do them in small groups as well. Some are very actionable, like you can do them very quickly, and there are others that take a little bit more prep. But all of them are things that I've used and tried in my own classroom that are very successful and that truly hone in on what differentiation is and what differentiation is not. So when you think about the word differentiation, um, a lot of teachers unfortunately have a kind of a misconception about what differentiation is. They think it's basically creating all of these different resources for students because this student needs this and this student needs this and this student needs this. And I get that there's a time and place for that, and I get we do need to give every student what they need and to be able to fill in holes. But there's a better way to do that. Differentiation actually means looking at one objective for all students, regardless of level, and then being able to support students to meet that objective regardless of where they are. So if I have a student who's on level, I give them what they need to meet the objective. If I have a student who is below level, then I give them some different supports to be able to meet that same objective. So it's not teaching them different things. Instead, it's teaching all students the same objective, but you use different strategies to approach that, okay? So tonight's strategies are going to uphold that actual definition of what differentiation truly is, all right? I do have a little printout for you. That way, if you don't want to take notes or if you want to remember these later, I'm going to link it up in the description as soon as I'm done. So just stay tuned to the end and you'll be able to head right back and grab the link and you can grab this, or if you want to take notes and then you won't need it, that's fine with me too. So grab a drink, grab a seat, or if you're catching this as a replay, that's perfectly fine too. And let's get started. All right, so differentiation strategies for teaching reading comprehension. Strategy number 1 is called pre-underlining. And it is nothing fancy, but this strategy works so well for students who struggle with reading, specifically reading comprehension. And this really helps students who are in maybe upper grades, second, third, fourth, fifth, where you're getting into those longer passages and they have so much text to try to remember. So here's what you do. Let's say you have a passage or a text for students to read, and you have questions that you would like them to try and answer afterwards. Maybe this is on an assessment, maybe this is on a practice page, a center, whatever it may be. So you have a text and you have questions, okay? What you're going to do is when you prep these materials, let's say you have 5 students you want to use this strategy for, you'll prep for those 5 students a separate set of texts. So same exact text, but instead on this one, before you put it in the copy machine, you're going to go through the text, you're going to look at your questions that you have prepared, you're going to go ahead and find all the evidence that answers all of the questions, and you're going to pre-underline that evidence. Okay? Now you might be thinking, I'm giving them all the answers. Yes and no, right? Your students, all of them, are being asked to go back to the text and find answers, right? But what they're having to do while doing that is also connecting the questions to the text. They're having to think, okay, what is this question asking? What information in the text answers that question? So even if I pre-underline evidence, that still is happening with all of those students. So students who are struggling, what you're giving them is basically a um, more narrow options to be able to find the answer. So students who do not have this as a strategy, they have to go back and they have to sort through the entire text, right? They have every single word and paragraph to go through to deduce and figure out where is the evidence and how does that answer my question, or does it even answer my question? For your students who are using this strategy, they're going back to the text, and instead of having to go through every single word and paragraph, they're going to go straight to the things that you've underlined. Now, if you have 5 questions, there's going to be lots of things underlined. So they still have to deduce and figure out which ones answer the question, which evidence supports the question that you've asked them. So they're going to read all of those different pieces that are underlined, figure out which one connects back to, supports, and answers the question. Then they will then use that still to answer their question. So I'm not giving them any support on writing open-ended answers. Instead, I'm giving them support more on the side of finding the evidence. This is also a great strategy to use with students when you're teaching all students how to find text evidence. So a lot of times we jump in and we just say, go back and find evidence. It's right there. It's right there in the story. Look, why can't you see that? It's right there. And we get frustrated with why our students can't do this in the first place. Well, in reality, take 3 or 4 steps back. How much have we scaffolded and taught our students of what strong text evidence looks like and feels like, and how to actually connect evidence to questions, and how we know one piece of text evidence supports the question and the other one doesn't? There's a lot of teaching that goes into that. So you can actually use this strategy for all of your students when you're showing and supporting all of them to use text evidence. But it's also a very powerful strategy to use with students who are maybe struggling, maybe they're a level or 2 lower, and maybe they work a little slower, and you want to make sure that they're still having to answer all the same questions. The objective is still the same. They're given the same amount of time, but what all you've done is you've just narrowed down the options. And so if they get down to the very last question and they've got one more section of text that's underlined and it doesn't support the question that's left, then they know they've made an error somewhere. So they're still deducing even down to the very last question. So I love this strategy. It's perfect. You can utilize it in a lot of different ways. It's great for whole group. It's great for small group. Like I said, it's great for everyone when you're really focusing on text evidence too. So please, please, please do me a favor and try that strategy. Okay, next strategy is called break up text in questions. So I know, right? I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So this one is kind of similar to the pre-underlining, except you're not pre-underlining. What you're doing is you have a text, right? Multiple paragraphs. Again, this works really well for students who are reading at least 2, maybe 3 paragraph passages. So second, third, fourth, fifth graders. And then again, you have comprehension questions. And so what you will do is each comprehension question is numbered. You are going to go back into the text and you are going to find a large section of text. You are going to box that text in and write a number 1 next to it. Then for question 2, you will find that section of text and you will box it in. Now, you're not boxing in the exact answer, okay? Otherwise, that would be just like the number 1 of pre-underlining. You are boxing in a section of text that you want them to read, okay? Now, this works really well if your questions are in chronological order, okay? Because ideally, what you're wanting your students to do is you're wanting them to read and stop and answer question 1. Read, stop, answer question 2, and so on and so forth. So if your questions are all jumbled up, they're going to have to like read, answer, then read down here and answer, then read up here and answer, and they're not going to read the text from beginning to end. So ideally, you want your questions to be in chronological order. So you've boxed in or even draw a line, then say the word and write the word stop. So they read until they come to a line that says stop. When they get to that line or they get to that end of that box, then they go and answer question number 1. Then they go back to the text. They read until they get to the line that says stop. And they go and answer question number 2. All you're doing for them is basically taking away the fact that they are being required to remember every single thing in that entire story or that entire nonfiction text. And instead, you're allowing them, 1, time to stop and think. You know what? And if they need to reread, they have a smaller portion of text now that they can reread to be able to go and answer that question. Okay? And then they know the answer is somewhere in that smaller section rather than that very long text or passage that you've given them. Okay? So again, 5 questions, 6 questions, it works with however many. Put them in chronological order and then draw those lines where you want them to stop, number those sections. That way they know this section goes with this question. And it's just an easier way to allow them to read and practice comprehending and answering questions. But instead, I'm not having to read from word 1 to word 500 or whatever number of words there are. And I am able to then answer those questions a lot more easily than I would if I were having to juggle all of the words, all of the paragraphs, and all of the questions. Okay? So simple strategy, again, great for a lot of different situations, small group, whole group, etc. Definitely give that one a try. Okay? All right. Now, the next suggestion is one that does take a little bit more time as far as prep. But I will say that if you put your mind to this and you try it more than once, and the more you do it, the easier it gets. Okay? So do not be turned off by something, and I don't want you to overthink it either when you first start doing it. I promise the more you do it, the easier it gets. I'm going to say that 50 million more times tonight, I promise. But this is just called tiered activities. And tiered activities is a research proven strategy that helps with student differentiation. Because remember, back on at the very beginning of the movie, because this is a movie, I am a star. Just kidding. But at the beginning of this video, I said differentiation is all about keeping the same objective, right? Same objective for all your students. We just scaffold differently for those who need it. So for tiered activities, that's exactly what we're doing here. So all this means is you have an objective for your students to meet. You have an activity that matches that objective. What you're going to do is you are going to create or come up with some kind of activity that maybe is a little bit easier, maybe encompasses a prerequisite of said objective to have students do prior to the activity. And then you're also going to come up with an activity on the other end that maybe is a little harder maybe a little bit deeper thinking, a little bit more complex for students to do. And so now, instead of doing this activity with a partner, now they kind of have a three-part activity to do. And you're going to give them the same amount of time, and you're basically going to see how much they can get done. All right? You're not requiring all three for anyone, right? You are basically saying, here's our objective today. Here are the three parts to our activity. Let's go. And what this does is it allows students to work at their own pace and basically get work done that meets their own requirements of the objective. So if I have students who are struggling, they're going to end up spending more time on that lower stage of the activity, right? And then I'm going to go, and as I'm walking around the room and I'm working with students and I come up to them, I'm going to be able to work with them at the step in which they are at. So my students who are struggling, they're going to spend, like I said, spend more time at that lower level activity or question or whatever you're doing, whatever you've given them. That's where they're going to probably spend the majority of their time because that's where they struggle, right? And then your students who are on level, they're going to get that lower activity done pretty simply, and they're going to move to the next part of the activity, which that's probably where they'll spend the majority of their time. But then think about your higher students. Now they're going to breeze through that first activity. They'll probably breeze through the second activity, and now you've given them an activity or a question or whatever it may be for them to do. And so it's just kind of this open-ended, tiered activity time that you've given them. And it very much frees up and allows students to work at their own pace and really be able to hone in their time and effort on where they're struggling. And so you might surprise your students might surprise you. You may have, let's say you have 8 students in your class who struggle with main idea. And you give them this tiered activity as a way to differentiate. You've got step 1, step 2, and step 3. You've explained all the steps on the board, and you've got 15 minutes. Go. You may have 2 of those students who struggle with main idea. They may get step 1 done a lot faster than the other students. And they may get into step 2, and now they have time to really dig in and try to figure out how to complete this activity rather than just being given step 1 and that's all they get. Because one, that's a different objective. It's not fair to them, right? So let's be fair to all of our students, and these tiered activities is a way to do that. So again, it takes a little bit more prep, a little bit more thinking on our end. So just here's my challenge to you. Think about an activity you already have paired this week. What is something that you could give your lower students to kind of support them with that activity? What's something you could give your higher students to extend that activity, and then sandwich that in and give it to all of your students? And then come back to me and see what happens. I promise you it is going to be amazing. And I promise you the more you do this, the easier it gets. Okay? So tiered activities, highly, highly, highly recommend them. All right. All right. Number four, differentiation strategy. This is another just given, but it's one that I feel very passionate about, and it's one that I feel like when I'm talking about differentiation, if I don't talk about this, then I'm not doing my job as a coach. So what this is matching your learner to the intervention that they need. So this is a differentiation strategy when it comes down to when you're working one-on-one or two-on-one or three-on-one with students who need true intervention as a differentiation strategy. So you've identified students who struggle with X concept, whatever that X concept is, theme, main idea, cause and effect, text structure, whatever. You know they struggle with this concept. However, every standard, every skill we teach is not black and white. So it is our job as teachers to be able to take time and deconstruct every skill and every standard and every strategy we teach into bits and pieces. And then we use those bits and pieces to figure out what our student needs. Okay? So think about back to the intervention Facebook Live that I did, I think, a few months ago. And I presented you all with intervention pages. And at the top of those was a breakdown of each of those strategy or skills. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, drop me a link and I will give you the link to that video. That way you can go watch that. You can go grab those pages for free as well. Okay? But basically, that video was exactly what I'm talking about right now. We need to make sure that we're not just throwing main idea at our students who struggle with main idea. What is it about main idea that they're struggling with? There may be some prerequisites for main idea that if we just keep throwing main idea at them and we're not actually filling the holes that are there, meaning some of the prerequisites for main idea, then they're never going to understand main idea. So as a teacher, I have to know the whole scope and sequence of what main idea really is. I need to know it from very early on levels, kindergarten levels, all the way up to fourth and fifth grade levels. What is main idea, or what does main idea look like from stage 1 to stage 5? Okay? When I know that, when I can see and feel and understand that scope and sequence of a skill, then when I have a student who struggles, I can then use data, use a conversation, use guided reading materials or whatever it may be, and I can match my student to the need and then create an intervention for that need. Okay? I promise this is not as scary as it sounds. The more you understand your standards, the more you understand your skills, the easier this becomes. So, what is my advice to you for this one? If you have not taken time to deconstruct your standards as a school, as a grade level team, or even just yourself, if though nobody else is doing it with you, this is something you have to do. You have to spend time looking at your standards and figuring out what is all encompassed in them. What is everything a student needs to be able to do the standard before and even after? Okay, and create that scope and sequence range. I'm going to show you an example real quick. Let me grab something. This is something that I have been giving my boot camp participants. So if you're in my boot camp right now, give me a shout out. But here's an example, okay? This is one for making connections. And so you can see here, I have listed out 10 different pieces of making connections. So when I say, oh, my student's struggling with making connections, well, what do you mean? Where in making connections are they struggling? So let me just read this out to you. And I want you just to picture in your head how this scope and sequence would help you identify interventions for students. So level 1, this is very basic. Student understands that schema is relevant when reading. So this is relevant when reading. They use their schema prior to reading. They understand the difference between the different types of connections. They make surface level connections. They monitor their own thinking while reading. They use connections to make predictions or inferences in a text. They connect to other readers' connections. They use connections to clarify information in the text. They make deep connections when reading, and they expand upon deep connections that are made. Do you see how this is very, very basic? And this is a lot more advanced. So needs to be done with every skill we teach. And we need to make sure we understand this. Because now when I have a student who is struggling with making connections, and I know that they're struggling with making just even simple connections, they don't understand that, then I can go back and look, do they understand what schema is? Do they understand why it's so important to us when we read? Are they activating it prior to reading? And do they even understand the different types of connections and where we make them and what we make in them before they even learn how to make connections? So there's a lot to this. So if you're wanting these, unfortunately, they're not available right now. They're available for my bootcamp participants, but that's closed. So they are going to be available in another way coming up soon. So drop me a comment below if you're interested in pages like this for all the strategies. But My whole point of this is, and I'm sorry I didn't mean to drop this on you, but I felt like an example was needed at that point. But my whole point in saying all of this is, in order to truly differentiate for our students, we need to make sure we understand every piece of every skill that we're teaching. We cannot just be doing the same thing over and over again, hoping that our students are going to get it. So, understanding the scope and sequence of each skill and strategy will help us be able to match the student to the whole, to the intervention, and then boom, connecting all three will help fill that hole and move our student along. So, I'm sorry if I felt like I went off on a tangent there, or if that was very confusing. Please feel free to ask questions. Shoot me an email. I'm happy to go through any of this with you. But hopefully that was, or hopefully it made sense. Hopefully it was helpful and meaningful for you. So if you want this little printout of all four of the differentiation strategies we talked about tonight, like I said, when the video is over, I'm going to drop a link up at the very top and in the comments. So just give me a second and look for that, and it'll be there. That way you can grab this and have it for notes for later. But thank you so much for joining. I'm so appreciative of you being here, and I'll see you next week, Wednesday, at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for another episode in Adventures of Comprehension. So thank you so much, friends. I'll talk to you soon, and have a great night. Bye.